Hey everyone! So I'm going to be doing a video tutorial on how to make these pleated face masks for the Bryan Hospital project. These are just 2 layers of fabric with elastic straps. So to make these, what you'll need are 2 pieces of fabric that are cut 9 inches long by 6 inches wide. You'll also need some 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch elastic, and these are cut at 7 inches long. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking the 2 pieces of fabric with a lot of lint apparently. Oh, there's a lot of lint on there. Anyway, you're going to take the 2 pieces of fabric and you're going to put them right sides together. Now this fabric does not really have a right side or a wrong side, but if your fabric does have like a print or something else, go ahead and put them right sides together. So your right side would be up here, and then you would take your other piece of fabric, say this is the right side, you're going to put that down right on top of that. And you're going to be matching all of the corners, so that way it's nice and square. So match all of the corners together so they're nice and square on top of each other. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing all around the outside of the fabric, but we're going to be pausing when we get to the corners so we can add our elastic in. And so I'm going to demonstrate how to do that right now. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and go to your sewing machine, and on the long side, go to about halfway down on the long side, because when we sew around, we're going to need to leave about a 2-inch gap. And so we're just going to start in the middle here. We're going to sew a 3/8 of an inch seam. So if you have a seam gauge or a piece of tape, or if you feel pretty confident that you can follow right along the line, go ahead and either mark that or put your fabric right on that 3/8 of an inch mark. And you're going to go ahead and lower your presser foot. And we're going to go forward a couple of stitches and backward a couple of stitches just to secure that end. So I'm going to go forward a couple and then backwards. And then when I stitch, I want to leave about 1.5 inch gap from the end to allow some room to insert the elastic. So I'm going to mark about 1.5 inch mark with my finger. So when I stitch, that's when I know where to stop. Or you can just eyeball it to right about there. So you still have enough gap in there to work with your elastic. So you're going to take your elastic here, and when you put it in, you're going to lift this top piece up momentarily, and then you're going to put this elastic in at a diagonal from the corner. So it's basically splitting the corner at a diagonal. And then you're going to lower the fabric right on top of it to create a little sandwich and hold that in place as you stitch. So go ahead and go slow, and you're going to stitch all the way to the end, back stitch, and then go forward again till you're about at that 3/8 of an inch from the end. So then when we go to turn it, so I'll show you. So go ahead and stitch all the way forward. We're going to stitch all the way forward, stop, we're going to back stitch. This basically will secure that elastic in place, and we're going to go forward till we're at about 3/8 of an inch from the needle to the edge of the fabric. So that's about 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to lift our presser foot up, turn it so you can see that fabric is right along that 3/8 of an inch seam. You're going to lower your presser foot, and then you're going to take a couple of stitches forward and then a couple of stitches backwards. So take a couple of stitches backwards, and then what we're going to do is we're going to open this fabric back up, and we're going to make sure our elastic is completely flat coming out of that corner. And then we're going to rotate this elastic slightly. Let me scrunch that fabric up so you can see. and then you're going to match that elastic at a diagonal in this corner. So let me scrunch that back down, and then we're going to layer this fabric right on top, matching along this edge, and we're going to use our fingers to hold that elastic in place as we stitch. So now we're going to hold that elastic as we stitch. So we're going to take a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches backwards, and again we're going to stitch all the way to the end. So as you can see, my fingers are holding this elastic in place as I'm stitching. And we're going to stitch all the way to the end. And then we're going to back stitch. And then we're going to stitch forward to about that 3/8 of an inch mark. Go ahead and lift your presser foot up, rotate it around. You can kind of see it unlined there, so I'm going to push my fabric back so it matches the edges again. Then lower your presser foot, and we're going to stitch along this edge till we're about 1.5 inches from the end again. So take a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches backward, and then we're going to stitch all the way to the end. Now I'm not using any pins right now, but if you feel that you need pins to keep this fabric from sliding around, feel free to pin it as you go. Okay, so I have about 1.5 inch gap from my edge to where my needle is. So then I'm going to take my second piece of elastic, I'm going to lift this top layer up, take my elastic and go at a diagonal from the corner, and then lower this top down to form a sandwich. And I'm going to use my fingers to hold that elastic in place, and I'm going to stitch all the way to the end, back stitch, and then come forward till I'm about at that 3/8 of an inch mark. So I'm going to go all the way to the end, going to back stitch, and I'm going to go forward till I'm about at that 3/8 inch mark there. Lift your presser foot up again, rotate around, and then lower your presser foot. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open this top layer up again. Again, checking to make sure your elastic is flat. Then you're going to spin this elastic around to meet at a diagonal in the corner here. So diagonal at the corner. And then you're going to take the top piece and match in that corner. So I'm going to scrunch this back down, matching in the corner here, right there. So making sure your elastic is at a diagonal and forming a sandwich. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch this end. So let me reposition this camera a little bit. There we go. All right, so holding that elastic, I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches backwards, and then stitch all the way to the end, making sure you are holding onto that corner elastic so it doesn't slide on you as you stitch. Again, if you feel you need to pin it, go ahead. I'm going to stitch all the way to the end, back stitch, come forward to about 3/8 of an inch, lift my presser foot up, rotate around, lower my presser foot, and then we're going to stitch along this end. You want to, as you can see here where our previous stitches are, you want to leave a 2-inch gap from there so that way you have room to turn. So we're only going to stitch to about 2 inches where this top finger is, so that way we have room to turn our fabric. So we're going to go forward, go backwards, and then we're going to stitch until we have about a 2-inch gap. So that's right about where my finger is. And then we're going to stop, back stitch, a couple of stitches, and then go forward, and then go ahead and cut your threads. Okay, so now you can see we have a gap right here, and we have stitched all the way around this piece of fabric. And so next we need to turn it inside out, but first we need to cut these corners down. So you trim at like a diagonal, so a diagonal from the corner, so you have less bulk there, so it makes a nice crisp corner. Make sure when you trim it, you do not cut into these stitches. So you'll still leave a little bit of fabric, but you don't cut into the stitches. What I've been using are these pinking shears here that have this diagonal in it, so that keeps it from fraying. But you can go ahead and use regular scissors as well if you do not have these, but this will just reduce the bulk. So I'm going to cut at a diagonal down that corner, and a diagonal down at this corner. So you can see I've reduced that bulk right at that point, so it will make a nice sharp corner. So we're going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these corners. So again, we're going to go at a diagonal and go at a diagonal again on that corner, and then do the remaining two corners. So again, we're going to cut a diagonal and cut at a diagonal and cut again. So now you can see that every single corner has reduced bulk on it. And so that will make it easier to turn inside out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up our gap and pull the inside out to turn this right side out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and come right back. Okay, so now once we've gotten it turned right side out, we're going to take a chopstick, a skewer, a pencil, something with a semi-pointed end to push out these corner pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the gap in the fabric. We're going to take our skewer and we're going to push it all the way and push that corner out. So go ahead and push the corner out and do that to every corner. So I'm just taking my end and pointing it out on all four corners. Like so. If you need to, you can tug on the elastic a little bit to pull out the corner, but not too hard. Okay, so now we have our piece all pulled out and pointed. So we're going to kind of flatten a little bit with our hands. What I like to do is kind of roll the edge a little bit, because sometimes it doesn't quite want to lay flat. So I'm just going to roll that slightly on all of the edges just to get it nice and flat. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to take your iron and gently press down to flatten all the edges. So I'm just going to gently press just to flatten your piece down. So just gently press down. It helps to have a little steam iron. Just press it down so it's nice and flat. Okay, like so. Now, you're going to take the end that has a gap in it, so that's this end for me, and you're going to have that so it's facing upwards away from you. Looks like I have a spare string here, so if any string sticking out, make sure you clip those. So make sure it is facing up and away from you. So we're going to be putting 3 pleats, or actually we can do 2 pleats. So let's do 2 pleats, it might be a little bit easier. 2 pleats into this mask. So we're going to find the 1/3 point in this mask. So that's right about here where my upper finger is. And we're going to find that corresponding end across. So we're at our 1/3 point. We're going to take our fingers and we're going to pinch at those two ends. So we're going to pinch at those two ends, and we're going to bring that up just slightly, up so you have a nice pleat formed. Then you're going to take your iron, be very careful so you do not burn your fingers. You're going to take our iron and press that down. So work with your tip of your iron to get that pressed down. So you have your first pleat formed right along there. Next, what we're going to go is we're going to find the halfway point of this, and we're going to do the same thing and fold it up. So we're going to find our halfway point on each end, and then we're going to fold it and bring it upwards. So you have your pleats formed. So make sure they look about even, but bring that up. I like to take my two fingers to kind of hold it in place while I'm grabbing the iron. If you want to use a partner, feel free to do that as well. But use your two fingers to hold that down as you grab your iron and iron that in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and iron that in place. So now you have your pleated mask. And so next what we're going to do is, if you have any clips, or if you have, I use these little wonder clips here, or if you have pins, you can use those to clip these pleats in place as you sew. So I like having little clips to kind of clip them in so they don't slide on me as I'm sewing. Again, if you have pins, you can use those, or if you have like hair clips, those will work as just fine to clip them in place. But these, I prefer the clips because it's easier to remove. But again, pens would work, hair ties, bobbing pins, something to clip that down. So next we're going to go back over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch right about 1/4 of an inch around the outside to seal this all in. So let's go over to the sewing machine and finish sewing this. Okay, so we are back at the sewing machine. We have our mask all pre-clipped, and what we're going to do is I'm going to move that off to the side. We're going to sew 1/4 of an inch along the whole outside. So on my machine, I have a black mark right where my 1/4 inch is. You can move the tape from earlier to this point, or if you have a seam gauge, you can move it to there to get your 1/4 inch. I'm gonna go ahead and eyeball it, because on my machine, kind of right here along my foot is about 1/4 of an inch. So that's what I'm gonna use. If you want to use the edge of your foot as well, that works just fine. So I'm gonna lower my presser foot down. I'm gonna remove this first clip to get it out of my way. And then I'm going to stitch a couple stitches forward and then a couple of stitches backwards. Now you can kind of see it stuck a little bit there, like it doesn't want to move. So sometimes if you raise your needle up and move the fabric forward a little bit and then backstitch again, then it won't catch again. So just keep an eye on that. So just take a couple of stitches forward, go back again, because it is pretty thick. See, it's sticking again. So I'm going to lift my needle up, move it slightly forward, just slightly, and then try again, and it should help. Now you can see, you've probably noticed this whole time, I have a different looking foot on my machine. This is called a walking foot. It really helps with these thicker layers to have that. Doesn't mean you can't sew this without one. It just helps to put it on because it has these little feed dogs on the top that pull the fabric from the top and the bottom, so it's not pulling either way. You can use a regular foot and just go slower. You may have to pull more on this side as you go to push it along a little bit. But if you have a walking foot, I would highly recommend putting that on. And so we're going to go ahead and stitch all the way around at that 1/4 inch, back stitching a little bit towards the end where this elastic is. but don't sew all of the way to the end. You want to leave that 1/4 inch gap. So when you put your needle down to turn, you're at that 1/4 inch mark, kind of like how we did on the inside. So make sure you don't go all the way to the end, just stop right about that 1/4 inch mark. So I'm going to go ahead and keep stitching. I got to this clip, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to keep stitching forward. It helps to stitch slow along this part. And so I'm getting closer to this end. See how it's kind of bunching up? Just go ahead and lift your presser foot if you feel that it is sticking at all. So that, feel free to use that to kind of troubleshoot. But we're going to go ahead and stitch because we're about a 1/4 inch there. I'm going to take a couple of stitches back just to secure that elastic in. I'm going to go back up right to where that mark was. Put the needle down. Lift the presser foot and rotate this around to start stitching down this edge. And then we're going to go forward a couple of stitches, backwards a couple of stitches, and then we're just going to stitch right along here at about a 1/4 inch. You can go a little bit less. I wouldn't do anything less than 1/8 inch, but right around a 1/4. Stitch till you get about that 1/4 inch again. Take a stitch or two back. Stitch or two forward back to that same mark. And then we're going to rotate around again. So I'm going to take out this clip. It helps that we ironed it beforehand so that way these stay in place as you stitch so they don't move around on you. So we're going to take a couple of stitches forward. Couple stitches back to where we started, and then we're going to go forward. I'm going to move this clip out of the way, and you're going to keep stitching so you get to about a 1/4 inch from the end, which is right about there. You're going to back stitch a few stitches, go slow at this point, and then go back to where you started with the stitches. Have your needle down, rotate around, lower your presser foot, and then we're going to stitch along this final edge. So take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches backwards, and then go all the way to the end to finish out your mask. And you see where we started before, just stitch right up to those stitches, back stitch, and then right up to those stitches. And go ahead and clip your ends. So I'm going to take my scissors and clip my ends here. And that is how you make a mask. So pretty simple. If you have any questions as you are making this mask, please feel free to reach out to me at any time and I can troubleshoot any issues that you may be having. But have fun, enjoy, and I hope we can all kind of share our experiences at our next club meeting. All right, take care.